CoMo Comic Books, man. How you doing? Welcome to 10 Questions.
Hey, Jimmy. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Cool, man. Yeah, I've followed your channel for a while. Excited to get you on here and ask you these 10 questions. So let's get right into it. And the first question, as you know, is always the same. What or who got you into comic book collecting?
Really, I think it was just growing up in a small town. There wasn't a lot to do for a kid my age. And I grew up at a time, like when I was real young, I had a couple grocery stores in town. One of them had 3 spinner racks, and the other one had just the comics at the end of the magazine section there at the store. And it was a fun escape. That was basically how I got into it. And when I was younger, on the weekends, my dad and my uncle used to go to the farm, and my mom and my aunt would take me and my sister with them before I was young or, old enough to do farm stuff. So we'd always wind up at antique stores and flea markets and stuff like that. So that was naturally just something I could hunt for while I was out with them. So it just kind of all snowballed together.
So was it one of those things where because I have very much the same story, right? I live in a small town. My supermarket they didn't have the spinner racks. They had like the magazine stand, comic books on there. Yeah. Was there a book that you saw initially like on that just jumped out to you and you're like, wow, this is cool?
Well, I was a huge Ghostbusters fan. So, like the movies, the cartoon show, Real Ghostbusters, and Now Comics came out with a Real Ghostbusters series back in the late 80s. And then the first book I went back and traced because I've still got pretty much everything. I have a coverless copy of Ghostbusters 2 adaptation that now put out. It was a 3-part series. I think issue 2 is the earliest one I can find. So I would say just tying into Ghostbusters 2 back there in 1989 was kind of the thing that got me to, take a leap at the rack.
So you managed to keep all yours from like when you first started buying them. You were a collector from the jump. I mean, did anybody else in your family collect that like kind of made you? Because I have all my stuff too from when I was a kid. Like I have it all. But my uncle was a collector.
I think the thing that helped me, I mean, obviously, like I said, my mom was an antiquer, so we'd go and she'd collect glassware that she liked, just the standard stuff. But she was also an Army brat. So when she was a kid, she fondly remembers having the first Barbie and also remembers when that Barbie got sold or given away because, well, it's time to move to someplace new. So thankfully I had a mom that was really supportive of that's your stuff. I'm not going to throw it away. Now that kind of transitions 30 some odd years later into, hey, your crap's still in my basement. Can you come get it? Yeah. Which is a problem I would much rather have than looking back and trying to remember everything I had and trying to piece as much of that back together as I can or, want to.
Well, one of the things that like I still have like all my toys from when I was a kid, like Star Wars. One thing that I wish I would have done, my parents didn't know. Like I said, my uncle was a collector. My dad not so much. He supported me just because I like to do it.
Yeah.
But I wish I would have like kept the boxes and done things like that. And I found myself when we would buy, like what comes to mind, because you said Barbie dolls, what comes to mind is Monster High dolls. My daughters were real into these Monster High dolls. And when we would get them for Christmas, I wouldn't let them just rip the box open. Yeah. Like I would actually go over and surgically cut the tape off and take it out. I kept every piece of everything so I could all put it back together when they got to where they want to play for it. Now, a lot of that stuff's broken, and I'm having to put it back together and do things like that, but it's been kind of fun. Do you think about that now when you buy stuff like, okay, I got to make sure if I'm going to take it out of the box, I got to make sure, because I don't even take my stuff out of the box half the time.
Yeah, I'm pretty disciplined. I don't let myself buy a lot of new stuff just because I know how slippery of a slope that can be. Now I have broken down and picked up a few things. Like Mattel did the WWE and Motu mashups. And I'm a huge Scareglow and Undertaker fan. So when Scareglow and the Undertaker got put out as, you know, a mashup. I had to buy that. You know, there was no way around that.
Right.
But I leave everything on card now. So I did pick up all the retro Ghostbusters that came out, you know, that look like the real Ghostbusters ones. I'm not really sure why, because one of the first things I actually put together when I got back into toy collecting and kind of got bit by that nostalgia bug was the original first wave 6-back real Ghostbusters figures. So I have all the original ones, which are impossible to find. But then I also have a set or two of the repops. But I really just, you know, they're display pieces anymore. And I've learned that lesson of opening things and not taking care of them. So the things I do buy now, I leave in package, because it doesn't take very long to scroll through eBay and look at some of the things I had as a kid and see what they sell for. You know, not even mint in box, or, you know, mint and sealed box, but just complete, in box or with the box, period. I bought a toy collection, and just off frame here is an Eternia set I bought earlier this spring, and the box is really the only thing they didn't have. I think there was like one gun and the sticker sheet, which they still have. I'm hoping to still get. I got all the literature, every piece. But they'd thrown the box away because the box was huge, right? The sad thing is this box is worth about half the value of the whole freaking playset. But I'm not going to complain. I actually assembled this Eternia myself for the first time. It had never been put together by the original owner.
Oh, wow.
And I was talking to, I actually bought it from the original owner's dad, and he found the instructions, and he's like, yeah, I remember why we never put this together, because holy crap.
Right. I mean, toys like that back in the day, it was very different. Like, you know, Legos today and things like that, people like to put together. But I mean, even today, though, I remember putting doll houses together for my daughters at Christmas, and it was just pure torture.
Oh, yeah. And that was the worst part about one of the toys I remember getting for Christmas was, I think it was called the Danger Room playset. It was for the Toy Biz X-Men line, but it was like a cylinder, and it fanned out. And there's actually a scratch on the coffee table at my mom's house in the basement. I don't even know that she knows this, but we're Catholic, and we always go to midnight mass, and then we come home after church, and that's when we open our toys. So I got this thing. It was awesome. I had to play with it, but that meant it was 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm in middle school or elementary school, whenever this was, trying to put this thing together. And I didn't get a screw seated all the way. I cross-threaded it. So I went to scoot this thing, and it just put this giant gash in the coffee table downstairs. But I didn't care, because, you know, I had to play with this awesome new playset I just got.
No, absolutely. Christmas was the best, man. Being a kid, especially if you were into that stuff. I mean, I remember just many mornings sitting there putting together my AT-AT Walkers, my you know, Millennium Falcon, which all that stuff I still have, the G.I. Joe stuff I had. So it was very cool. All right, and before we move to question 2, I want to ask this. So you grew up on a farm.
Well, we had a farm. I didn't grow up on the farm, but yeah.
What kind of farming did you do?
Well, mostly, let's see, I was in like first or second grade when my dad and my uncle bought our first farm, and it was a recreational farm primarily. They did like sharecropping or cash rent for the actual ag part of it, but for the most part, it was just, you know, recreational and hunting for the most part.
Well, a lot of people do that around here too. I mean, you know, they'll farm, they'll have a few cattle, things like that, you know, for the ag part of it. But the biggest thing is it's for hunting. You know, they'll lease out land to hunt, and, you know, ride side by sides on 4-wheelers, whatever. I mean, that's kind of what we do.
Which, you know, back when they first started buying up pieces of land, it was a couple $100 an acre, a couple $300 an acre for that kind of ground. And then just over the last 30 years, it's shifted to where, my God, you know, there are farms. There was a farm just down the road from where our current farm is that my grandpa or great grandpa used to own. And, you know, it wasn't a huge tract of land, but it sold for over $1 million a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy,
like,
brother.
God almighty. So
yeah, no, it is. It's crazy, man. And people, I mean, what's funny, what we're learning here about our local economy is we have all these hills and all this land and all this acreage that you can't really use for anything but hunting and riding and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Some people will timber,
Yep.
but most people from around the country are leasing this property just to come in and hunt.
Yep.
Build cabins on them, they'll lease them. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty interesting as far as, and it's gotten, the land value here has gone up a lot. I mean, this is a comic book show. We're not getting into real estate, but
Yeah.
When you said that, I thought it was interesting. What kind? I was just wondering if it was like true, like farming, or if it was kind of like what we do here. So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I can drive a tractor. I'm not the best, I can do. I built some fence. I've seen some things. I'm kind of a weird person. The fact that I'm into a lot of different things, and I don't know how often you find somebody who has as eclectic of interests or experiences as I have. Oddly enough, sports is the one thing I don't really get too crazy about, just because I get passionate. So like I'm a Mizzou fan. Went to Mizzou, but I try not to get too interested because I just getting worked up about something I have zero control over is not healthy. So,
oh no, absolutely. Well, I've been to like 4 road games, Kentucky football, and actually Mizzou is one of them. And if you actually, this is, if I can get it down here, you can see that.
Oh, nice.
Missouri. Yeah. I'm a season ticket holder, and then once a year they take like season ticket holders, boosters, things like that. They'll take you to an away game. And Missouri was one of the ones I got to go to. So
nice.
Yeah, and we got beat.
Hey, all right.
Yeah, no, you're like, yeah, go Zoom. No, but anyway, all right. So question 2. Let's roll on to question 2. And so you've done the comic book thing your whole life. What brought you to YouTube?
Well, it's kind of a sad story, I guess. So I'd worked at my local comic shop for the better part of a decade. Part of it was off the books, just kind of hanging out. And then I eventually got put on the payroll, and I was doing all the social media. And for the last several years, basically a lot of the acquisition stuff. So like people were selling collections and stuff. I'd be the one to go through it and figure out what we'd offer and, just close the deal and stuff like that. That was primarily all me. And I worked at the second oldest comic shop in Missouri. So the store opened in October of 1973, and up until I think it was the first part of last year, the last part of 2020, it was still owned by the original owner. So kind of a unique tale there. But he'd taken on a co-owner who was a guy who'd managed the store for years and had worked off and on at the store over the better part of 30 years. But his name was James, and we were just really good friends. He was pretty much the guy who was always there when I was working. So the comic shop was kind of like our clubhouse. So there was several of us that would go, and, every Thursday and Friday night, we'd just hang out. Once we got off work, hang out till close, hang out after close. We'd do events, at the store together, just chill. We had a special crew for FCBD. We just had a pretty tight-knit community. And then James unexpectedly died on Thanksgiving Day, or the night of Thanksgiving, in 2019. And it just kind of, he was the glue that kind of held all that together. So going into the shop wasn't the same. It eventually changed hands and transferred ownership, and it's just kind of like you can never go home again. That's kind of how it felt. Sure. And it was, inside of 2 months from when he left or died, that I posted my first video. And the thing was just, talking comics is what I did, what I do. And the wife can only handle so much of that. Right. So, like I mentioned before we started, I'd started picking up equipment along the way with the thought that maybe me and some of my buddies could do, a podcast similar to the facade that comic book men put on, right? Sure. Where it's just a couple of dudes hanging around the table, talking shop. So I had a lot of the gear, and I had, when when you get married and you get the camera to, shoot all the photos of all the things you're going to do. So I had a camera, I had all the audio equipment. So I'm like, I'll give this a shot. And that's just kind of how I wound up on YouTube. It was basically therapy for me to be able to get back on the horse and talk about comics and just, get that stuff out and not just trying to internalize it or repress it or whatever. And, not drive my wife crazy.
Sure. Well, I mean, and I'll ask you this because, we were talking before and I told you that, we were talking about our equipment, just inside baseball. We were talking about equipment and just kind of being newbies at this and doing all that. And I went into it on just a whim as far as trying to prove something to my girls. But then I found this passion, and I think that passion comes from the community that I've become a part of on YouTube. And I don't want to say that has it replaced it, what you had at the comic book shop, upon James's passing. But is it similar? Is it different? Like the community that you found here on YouTube?
It's different, but it's not different better. It's not different worse, right? It's interesting, and I'm sure this is something that it's when you do the YouTube thing, it's kind of it's not a solely unique experience. Like there are other people out there on YouTube, but it's similar to anything you do that's a unique experience that you go through with a select group of people. Kind of the worst equivalent I can make is people who serve together or work together, that are kind of become a tight-knit group, that those people share your experience, so therefore you can relate better. And what I found getting into the community, there are guys like Brian from Bryce Comics, Mickey with Swaggle Hoss, even Chris over at Journos, Ryan with Automatic. There's just a lot of guys that I've come to meet over the last couple of years that we'll hop on a live stream, right? And we'll be on for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours. When the stream stops, that's when
it gets good.
Yeah, that's when the party starts. Then we just kind of all kick back. We'll still be on for another hour or 45 minutes, just chewing the fat, having a good time, because we all live in this same world. We have this shared experience of YouTube and creating content and all that, and it's kind of its own clubhouse all unto itself.
No, and you're absolutely right. And what's funny, and you're about to find out, like a lot of people will tell you about coming on 10 questions, is the best part is once the camera stops rolling and we BS for an hour after it's over, with, you can't get away from it. That's what we joke and say. You can't get away from Jimmy. He just sets you off.
Yeah.
But you're right. And I think that's a great perspective or a great explanation of what it is, and it's different because I never had what you had, meaning like I didn't have a comic book shop that I could go to. We didn't have comic book shops. I mean, where I sit today, the closest comic book shop's an hour away. It just so happens to be, 15 minutes or 5 minutes from my office. One of my offices, it just happens to be close. Yeah. And so I've kind of developed that somewhat later in life by going to the shop now. But when I was growing up, and even, when I kind of got back into it, I didn't really have that. To go hang out because I was already married and had kids by the time I even got back into the hobby. But I love the way that you explain that, and I think that's phenomenal. So let's talk a little bit about your channel, and I want to hit on a few topics that I've seen on your channel and kind of ask you about those, and probably two things that you do on your channel that I really enjoy are comic books to invest in before it's too late. And comics to invest in on a budget, and you'll do like $20, $50, $100. Yep. Kind of where did the idea for that content come from, and what are you hoping that the community gains from it by sharing that content?
Okay. Well, in all honesty, the necessity of the top 10 comics list came from the fact that that's the kind of content that gets consumed. Sure. In the in our niche, and when you're a new channel and you're starting out, you've kind of got to go where the viewership is if you want to get seen in the community, if you want to start building your subscriber count and just get that exposure. So that's really where that came from. I'd seen other people that had put out top 10 lists that had done well. And I'm like, well, I can try that. And I had some success with it. And then all of a sudden, like I had one does really well and one just absolutely explodes. And the next thing you know, 20% of your subscriber count has been generated by this one video. You know how something maybe not viral in the same perspective as like a Mr. Beast video, that gets 11 million views. But if you're a small channel and all of a sudden you wake up and you've got a video that's a couple weeks old that's got 15-20,000 views, when you're used to getting 2 or 3 or 500 or whatever it is, that's a big deal. So I just started, how can I riff off this? Because obviously I can't do comics to invest in every single week. That's one, you're eventually going to run out of books to talk about. And that's even something I run into now. It's like, okay, well, I've already talked about that. And there have been books that I've got to follow along their progression. So, they were 50 or they were 100 and now they're 100, or they're grown up enough that they make the big quarterly list. So some of those get touched on more than once, but I try to keep the list as fresh as I can and talk about books that I haven't talked about yet, because ultimately the angle I take on it is I've even kind of got away from trying to use the word invest so much. It was really easy to say, hey, this is a good investment in 2020 and the first half of 2021, when literally everything in the world was increasing in value. But I also kind of got to the point where it's like, the first time somebody shows you proof or at least circumstantial evidence that something you said has had an influence in the market, it's kind of a gut check. So, or it was for me anyway. So Brian from Bry's Comics and I did a collaboration video, and I talked about Daredevil 131's the main book that comes to mind. And it was the next week or 2 weeks later, that book had like a 15 or a 20% jump in value on Key Collector. And he just screen grabbed that and sent it to me and said, "That's all you, bro." And I just like shriveled up. I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, like I shouldn't have this power. Like, nobody should have the power to influence the market like this. So that kind of gave me a real reality check that I needed to be really mindful of what I said, how I said it, and just I'm a huge Spider-Man fan, and as cliched as it may be, it comes back to, with great power comes great responsibility. Ultimately, it's like if I have the power to influence people, I have to make sure that what I'm doing is done correctly, done well. So I've slowly tried to transition away from using the word invest. And now it's just more of a trying not to focus on the value or the spec potential things, but if you've got X amount to spend and you walk into a shop or a show or whatever, like, here's some cool things you can look for, because if you're a collector, you want to build out the collection, right? And one of my big collecting principles or beliefs is that it's quantity or not, it's quality, not quantity, right? So I'd rather buy one $100 book as opposed to 5 $20 books.
Sure, that makes sense. So the first time that happened, where you realized, crap, I said this, and boom, this happened in the market. And I've had several people on here who talk that, and I see it on both sides. Like, there are people in the community that see that as a negative, right? Like, especially with some of the bigger channels like Comic Tom, Jim Mint, and people almost make the accusation that they are trying to drive the market because they're going to sell certain books.
Yeah.
And do you believe that to be the case? Do you believe that's true? Do you, not specifically about Comic Tom, but do you think, because you said it happened, you said something and it actually occurred. So you pay a lot of attention to that as far as now to make sure that you're, here's what you're saying. Hey, if you buy these books, remember, it's an investment. You can lose money. It's, I'm just telling you what I think. What's your thoughts on that part of it?
I think it's one of those things that you have to assume that somebody out there is doing that.
Of course.
And maybe that's just my negative view of human nature, but it's like where there's an opportunity to exploit, someone will exploit, right?
100%. If there's money to be made, somebody will do it.
Yep. So that's kind of how I operate on that notion. And honestly, I don't try and just pick books that I have in my inventory, because I set up at shows and conventions and stuff like that. And there's a young man who is a fan of my channel, and anytime I'm in St. Louis, him and his dad come and shop my booth, and his want list or his list of books he's looking for at the show is almost always half of whatever my last video was. And the first time they came in and introduced themselves and all this, I didn't have any of the books I just talked about on my top 10 list. Like, it was just like, these are books that I'm looking for essentially, so if you see them, grab them. And that was kind of disappointing, because I knew he was looking for those books because he'd watched my video. But then the next time we had a show at that same place, they came back and I had like 4 or 5 of the books I just talked about. It was one of the $20 or $50 videos where it's, it's a little easier to have more of the list. And he's like, do you have this? I said, yeah, you have that. Yep. Here you go. And by the time it was done, there was, a $250 stack of books there. And his dad was like, I liked it a lot better when you didn't have the books last time. But it's just that kind of thing. I think it's inevitable that, somebody's, sitting on a pile of whatever the flavor of the week is. And, they want to maximize their return. And that's not me. I'm not going to be that guy. If I talk about a book, it's because I legitimately believe in the book, or I think that it has value, whether it's from a collector standpoint or significance within the context of the story or whatever, more over the fact that, it's just might be worth money.
Sure. No, I mean, that makes sense. And like I said, that's a very, very tricky subject in the sense because we're all out here kind of doing this. And I mean, I sell books, from time to time. I'll sell mystery boxes from time to time. I firmly believe in letting the hobby fund itself.
Oh, yeah.
I try not to, spend mine and Amy's money, necessarily on comic books. It happens from time to time, but generally, if I'm trying to buy something, I'll sell something that maybe I don't care so much about anymore, and to try to get something new that I want. So, but I see that a lot on IG, right? Like, especially this past week, I saw a bunch of posts because there were a group of influencers that were gathered in one spot. And they were kind of hitting that, that topic hard. Like, they're out here.
I believe we call that MegaCon.
MegaCon, yeah. Yeah. So it was, I don't know. It was just interesting. So let's move on to question 4 here.
Can I throw one thing in on that?
Of course.
I think the most egregious example of that I saw in recent memory was we got the Daredevil announcement recently, right? That Disney Plus is going to do a Daredevil show. And the number of people I saw hyping Daredevil 1 online, just like, are you guys on drugs? Do you realize how much this book is up over the last 5 years? Look at this book 10 years ago. It was trash. Nobody wanted it. And it's up, you can't touch it hardly for less than 2 or 3K right now. And you're hyping it, get it before they go up. Yeah. It's like, no, this book is already got so much of this baked in, and it's just people trying to get that last little squeeze so they can get their money and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's a great point. So question 4 is about a month ago, I think. You did a a segment on, you had bought this Silver Age comic collection.
Okay, yeah.
And it was the original owner. And I want you to comment because I watched the video and it was awesome because I love Silver Age books. I love those. And I know, and we'll get into it a little bit here in a minute about, you know, what you do as far as reselling and things like that. But you buy a ton of collections. Like, is that something that you're constantly looking for?
Yeah, I bought one Monday. I buy every one I can find. I'm in a unique area. The LCS I used to work for still buys. There's another LCS here that doesn't. There's some collectors that try and actively buy. The next town down the road has a couple LCSs that buy, but it's a pretty passive area as far as trying to source collections. I tell you, the main advantage of putting your money on the line and opening a storefront outside of, you know, actually having people that can come in and give you money for goods and services on the regular is the amount of stuff that will just walk in the door because you have a door to walk in to, right? That is the biggest advantage LCSs have when it comes to buying stuff. But I've kind of adjusted my strategy some of how I proactively try and find collections, but it's, if I can squeeze the money together to buy collections at any point, I'm always buying. Yeah. Because actually it's a lesson I've had to learn the hard way a couple times, to not be sitting flush and being ready for something, because they always pop up at the worst times.
Of course. Yeah.
So I've tried to take that lesson and just be a little less risk adverse and you know, go for it when the opportunity presents itself.
Well, when the opportunity does present itself, are there collections that you don't buy? Like, are there specific things that you're looking for in a collection that, hey, yeah, this is one I'll buy, or, you know, B, this is one, I'm going to pass on this one. Can you talk about that just a little bit? What your strategy is?
Well, there's this interesting, I don't even know what the right word to call it is, but situation when you're buying comics. The people who tend to have the best stuff or good stuff oftentimes don't know what they have, and the people who have okay stuff or not so good stuff think they have a gold mine.
Sure.
So the things I tend not to buy typically are the things that are just not reasonably priced, or I can tell that I'm not going to be able to buy it where I need to be able to buy it to be profitable. And there's a lot of people who are realistic and understand that they're selling a collection at a wholesale price, that I've got to be able to make money. And, you know, the whole thing is trying to find that point where they're happy with what they get, and I'm happy with what I get and the amount of money I will eventually be able to get out of that. But there are instances. I went and looked at an auction that was local here a few weeks ago, a couple months ago now, probably. And it was an amazing collection that unfortunately had been stored in cardboard boxes in a damp basement for 20 years. I think I put an Instagram post out with some of the books in there, and I'm talking, these books, some of them were literally crumbling. The staples weren't rusted, they were melting into the book. It was just awful. The Batman 251 literally looked like there were 4 different types of mold growing in the centerfold. It was just heartbreaking to see. But there are collections like that that are not without value, but might be a hazard to put those next to some other books, you know. Right. So there's a number of factors that could keep me from buying a collection. But ideally, I mean, that Silver Age collection I bought, those are kind of few and far between. They're getting harder and harder to find, particularly with, you know, the original owner. But I mean, that's what it's all about. You know, I'll go to 15 bad ones just to get a shot at one good one like that.
It's the treasure hunt, right? I mean,
yeah. And I said this in an interview I did lately that just hit the channel, but it's like having the book is cool, but getting the book and knowing the story that went along with the book is, worth 10x to me anymore.
I agree. Yeah, no, absolutely. Because that's something I've always kind of considered doing just for fun as my kids get older. And I need, as my business career, anymore, I don't necessarily have to do the day-to-day stuff at my business. I just kind of manage everything.
There you go.
And I have time. And so, looking for things to do to fill my time because I can't sit still, unless I want to sit down and watch a movie or sit down and, watch a little TV show of some kind. I generally don't sit still. So just something to do. And so, I appreciate you answering that because that's something that I've just been thinking a whole lot about is just something to do.
It's fun. And one of the things that are kind of my motivation for it, it's like, I would much rather I get a collection that's locally sourced, go through, process it, and get it back into the local community versus somebody who's more of a regional or a national dealer coming in, just picking up the books and they're swept off to one coast or the other, or God knows where. And then that material, which originated here, spent its life here in the flyover is just gone.
Yeah.
So I realize that might be a fool's errand to a certain extent, but that's part of my motivation is just to keep some of that 4-color history here where it belongs, in my opinion.
I love that. There's a romantic tinge to that as far as, just, I don't know. And I dig that. And a lot of collectors feel that way, right? I mean, especially because a lot of what I have found as I've collected over the years is I started out because I'm a new comic book day junkie. I just like to read.
Okay.
And I love New Comic Book Day because I enjoy the stories. But I found myself even more and more, and I've been trying to think of a segment to do here on YouTube with it. Is going back and reading some of these classic stories and kind of discussing them. And I've kind of got into that here lately, and I've been buying a lot of older stuff. Just before we came on, I've gotten I love Jack Kirby. And I got into the Fourth World, series, Mr. Miracle, Forever People, New Gods, all those. And before we got here, I just picked up the full run of Forever People. And was kind of going through it and, putting it in bags and boards and just kind of seeing how good the quality was because I got it at a pretty good price. But I found myself really kind of venturing back into the older stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of hokey to read some of that stuff. I've actually, in the collection I just bought, there was an early 90s Masterworks trade paperback. It was only like half of the contents of the original Volume 1 Spider-Man Masterworks. So it's like AF-15 and ASM 1 through 5, but it's in really nice shape. It's just out of reach. I'd grab it. But it's just this really nice hardcover or soft cover, but it's got those first 6 Spider-Man issues, and it's fun to just flip through. And one of the last things I actually bought for free comic book day, they're coming out with the Epic collections now. So I can't remember which one it is, but basically the one I bought is when Ramita starts on ASM. So it's, a couple great Green Goblin appearances, who's my favorite bad guy. Then you've got, those first 10, 12 Ramita issues were just straight up fire. So going through and trying to reread some of those, it's great sleep aid if you're needing to doze off pretty quick. I've tried. I think I'm still on issue 439. I still haven't made it through the first one because I'll read about 4 panels and I'll be out.
Yeah, I feel you. No, absolutely. All right, so I want to jump into question 5 here.
Sure.
And this is, we record most of the time. I record these on Saturdays. And today you actually dropped a video where you interviewed Steve Barak, CBCS founder, about his move to mycomicshop.com. Give my viewers a quick teaser because I listened to about half of it this morning as I was kind of preparing. Give us a quick teaser about that interview.
Well, it was just kind of this really weird situation where I'd signed up to do this show. A buddy of mine, Tom, he's with MSG Comics on Instagram. He's he's got a pretty decent following over there. We set up at a lot of the same shows. He's from Lawrence, Kansas. I'm from Columbia, Missouri. So, we naturally have this rivalry, but we've gotten to be really good friends over the years. And, if he goes to a show and gives a good report, I tend to do that show later. If I go to a show and give a good report, he tends to try that show as well. And a friend of his has started doing some shows, or has done some shows down the Oklahoma area. And one of the things that was always kind of a big word of mouth down there is like Tulsa needs a big show. So his buddy threw together a show, went down there, and it was sponsored by my comic shop. So the show was last weekend, getting ready for it. And then was it last Tuesday or Wednesday that news broke that Steve was going to be leaving CBCS? And it was just kind of like, holy crap. That was unexpected. And then I drilled down and actually read what was going on. He's like, okay, he's going to my comic shop. I'm like, wait a second. My comic shop's going to be at this show I'm at. So I messaged the promoter, Peter. I'm like, should I expect to see Steve at the show this weekend? He's like, I think you will. Yeah. So that's just got the gears running in my head. Like, all right, well, I'm a terrible interviewer. I'm not very good at it. I can talk comics, with anybody. But when it comes to actually rattling out questions, Sean Evans from Hot Ones, I am not. I just, I don't have the best flow. And I think that probably comes through in the interview. But once I realized what was going on, we were going to be in the same place. This was significant news. I'm like, nobody else is going to have this level of access to Steve. Literally, I was talking to him within his first 6 hours on the job with my comic shop on setup day for the show last Friday. And, we just kind of worked out the details and got together and really just kind of talked comics. I mean, yeah, I asked him about his move and, why he felt like it was time to do something else, because I'm sure a lot of people in the community like myself have followed him for a long time, because I always loved the posts he made of the crazy stuff that just hit his grading desk. Like, you never knew what you're going to see. It was going to be some awesome pre-code horror book or just super high grade, whatever. It was always exciting to see what was going through CBCS. And one of the first questions I asked him, I think it was the first question. It's like, you always end every post with, I love my gig. And I believe it, right? Like it seems 100% sincere for me. So I had to know how you go from 2 to 3 times a week posts of I love my gig to accepting an offer and just leaving it all behind, right? And I understand he got to cash the check when he sold it to Beckett and all that. And, some of the reasoning makes perfect sense when you think about the context, what's been going on in the third-party grading community for the last couple of years. But that was really interesting. But we got into all sorts of stuff. I mean, he's obviously been a collector for forever. And one of I think my favorite questions that we kind of dove into over the course of the interview isn't even one that I'd prepared beforehand. But we got to talking about being a collector, like a high level collector back in the 80s and 90s, when you could walk into any kind of decent sized show around the country and there were just all these pedigree books around, like Edgar Church issues, San Francisco, Denver, all these legendary collections actively had issues that you could walk up to any major show and have a chance to buy. And he talks about when he bought, his first AF-15 or a more fun 52, that, he said he really questioned his judgment, because he's like, I bought this book, but I could have bought a house. Right. So it was a really interesting conversation. And I learned things about, there's a little nugget in there about something that's likely going to come out of CBCS in the next couple of months, or 12 months, 6 months, however long it takes them to get it implemented. There's a nugget in there about how he inadvertently named one of the pedigree collections that's recognized in the community. it's just it was fun. If you ever get a chance to talk to Steve, I definitely recommend it. He's very easy to talk to, very conversational, and genuinely loves the hobby. I've met him a couple times. There's a show in Oklahoma in the fall that he tends to frequent, and me and my friends have hit it for several years in a row now. And it's one of the, I think I refer to it as the uh, worst, best kept secret in the comic community, because it's just this little hole in the wall comic show, like what comic shows used to be. And you'll go there and you'll see per capita the best books imaginable for a show that size. Like last year, I found a Hulk 1 just in a box on a guy's table. I mean, it was a restored 8.5 Hulk 1 that was just on a box on this guy's table. It wasn't even on the wall. Golden Age craziness. It's just I love this show. So if you want to know what show that is, check out the video.
That's cool. Yeah, definitely go check out the video. I've watched about half of it this morning. It was very interesting. So if you're watching this, go over to CoMo's channel, check out that interview. Probably will, by the time this airs, it will have been out for maybe 4 or 5 days. But yeah, definitely go check that out. And
apologies for the slight echo in the audio during the interview. I had 3 options. We could go outside where it was raining, stay on the sales floor where it was noisy as all hell, or record in a concrete floor, bare walled room that sounds like an echo chamber. So I took the echo chamber.
I got you, man. Awesome. All right. Now, question 6, and this is kind of, we were talking about, CBCS. There was a post made this week by CGC, essentially saying, after talking to some prominent people in the community, they will no longer be listing defects on their labels. What's your reaction as a collector and as a reseller to this?
I'm glad you asked this question, because I've actually got a lot of comments and DMs and stuff, people asking, wanting to know my opinion on it. And I've been hesitant to make a video on it myself, just because everybody's got a video out there. And for the most part, I think we're all in agreement that it's not the right move. Yeah. Now, I did see, for some additional context, I saw where there's a thread that's making its way through the CGC boards where Matt Nelson, the president, addresses some changes that have previously happened, because apparently there's a whole list of notes they've been excluding from labels for a couple years at this point. So it almost seems just like that happened under the radar. Nobody noticed, and now that they actually shined a little light on what they plan to do, everybody's like, wait a second, maybe this isn't such a good idea. But I think it's the main concern I have is the level of defect that's not going to be called out.
Right.
The whole intent when they started putting these things on the label was that they were going to bring your attention to things that weren't obvious, that you couldn't generally perceive just by looking at the book and the case. So internal defects, hidden defects, right? Stuff like that. A lot of the things they've previously started leaving off were those things that you could see. You could see if a book had rusty staples. You could see if it had marveled chipping, that kind of stuff. And that I get. If you can look at the book, even if you need to look at it with a bit of a discerning eye to, see some of these things, I can understand not noting that. Now, when you're going to start blue labeling books, universal grading books that have coupons cut out, that have panels cut out, that have detached centerfolds, that have other missing pieces, just extreme defects or modifications to the book, I think that needs to be front and center. Like the buyer needs to be, or even the collector, whoever is looking at that book, needs to be able to get a quick assessment of the book just right up front.
Sure.
I understand wanting to keep the labels clean, trying to keep them less cluttered. That makes sense to me. I also understand that there could be some business element to this, that even if you're having people sign up just for a free membership so they can get access to the free notes, that at that point, you're building your email list.
Sure.
These are potential clients you could potentially bring onto a paid tier if they want to get on the backside of the paywall. It's smart business on paper, but I think when you actually look at it within the community and how most people feel about it, it's not the right move. I think really the only people it helps are people who have these kind of books that want to be able to move them easier, right? Sure. Because there are people in the hobby that won't buy a book if it has tape on it. So if you're not noting that there are 3 pieces of tape on the interior that maybe don't have tape stain bleed through yet, and they buy this book and they go home and check the notes or whatever and find out how it's tape, they're not going to be happy.
Right.
For instance, my buddy Tom, who I already mentioned, he was bidding on a book on Comic Link. It's a blue label, 1.8 major Silver Age key, wins the book, great price. Starts to look closer. There's a note on the book that there's a panel or a coupon or something missing out. It affects the story and the book's incomplete on a blue label.
Wow. Yeah.
At a 1.8. He sent me that and I was like, how on earth does an incomplete book get a 1.8, especially that affects story? And it's just, I think the fact that an error of that magnitude can happen when it's on the label, what kind of negative experience are we courting within the community when we start leaving that kind of thing off? And I get it. I'm a big proponent of buyer beware, seller beware. Everybody's got to do their due diligence, but I believe in transparency even more so. And my proposed solution is I think what CGC really ought to do is go 100% the opposite direction. It's easy to get on and just bitch and throw a fit about the change that's been made, but what solutions are we proposing? Essentially, my take on it is they need to take some of that real estate on the backside of the label that really just has a bunch of nothing or a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo. And why don't you just put the grader's notes on there? I mean, hell, if you got a book that's graded above an 8.5, you're going to have one line or nothing to go off of anyway, because, well, that's a whole nother story. But I just bought a 9.2. It's the Maximum Carnage Acclaim promo book from back in the 90s that came with the video game. It's a 9.2, no grader's notes. Why?
Right.
There's zero reason there shouldn't have been grader's notes noting the spine ticks or the spine stress, the slight spine tear, the rounding right corner on the front. It's you didn't grade this book a 9.8 or a 9.9. Tell me why.
Right.
I can see it. I know you saw it. That's why it's not a 9.8. Write it down and put it on the book. It's not.
I think that makes perfect sense, especially on the back label, because it doesn't take anything away from the front. That's what most of us are looking at anyway, is, the front of the book. And then you can always, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, and if you look at the back of the label, there's just a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo.
Right.
And blank space. It's, you're not losing anything. And I would argue that you're adding a lot of value because you're
adding transparency.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like they don't already print on the back of the label. There's, it tells you what the book is on the back of the label already. Right. So they're already double-sided printing it.
Yeah. So it's really nothing. It's a few keystrokes.
Yeah. It's a form change is all it is.
Yeah. So I think that makes perfect sense. But yeah, I wanted to talk with you about that. I thought I'd been seeing that, a lot of hype about that, this week, especially on Instagram is where I was seeing it. But,
yeah.
There was a lot of talk. So thanks for asking that or answering that question. I think that was a good answer. Good discussion anyway.
Yeah. It's fun to get the pitchforks and torches out every once in a while and go after a stupid decision.
Well, and really it's been building, right? Because of the turn times. A lot of mistakes. I've been seeing
fee increases. It's just, read the room, guys.
Yeah.
This is not the time to pull something like this.
No, absolutely. All right. So we'll move on to question 7. And this is kind of a new segment.
Okay.
4 10 questions. I've done it on 2 or 3 of the interviews now. and it's called Explain This Instagram Post. Okay.
Uh-oh.
So, and this is nothing major. It actually kind of leads me into a question, that I have for you. And this is the post.
Yeah.
And if I can read it, my glasses. Big shout out to the CoMo crew from Planet Comic Con back in August. We've been going 100 miles per hour since that show, but it's great to be back after missing 2020. So kind of explain that post to me.
Well, Planet Comic Con is our big show of the year. So it takes place in Kansas City. It's the biggest comic show at any point between Chicago, Denver, and Dallas. There's nothing bigger in the course of a calendar year. And, it's just right down the road. So that's the one show that it's not inexpensive for us to do it, but we're going to be there anyway. So the whole thought process is, pony up the money, set up, work your butt off, make some money, hopefully, and have a good time. Because I'm passionate about a couple different things. Comic books is one of them. Barbecue's another, and what better place to be passionate about barbecue than in Kansas City? Don't at me, Texas people. I like your all's Q as well. But it had been, obviously with COVID, it had been a really rough couple of years or 18 months or whatever. Planet was supposed to take place in March 2020. And basically the day the world shut down, like they sent us home from work, I think it was March 13th, and it was March 20th, 1 week later, that we were supposed to load up to head to Planet for that show. So we had been busting our butt. I had bought a couple of the best collections I'd ever bought in the months preceding this show. I was all amped up. I was planning on having just a fantastic show, and the rug got pulled out from underneath us 7 days before. Was it the right decision? Absolutely. It was just not safe at that point in time. So I get why it happened. It was just disappointing at the time and scary. I mean, nobody really knew what the heck was going on. So that was a bummer. But then to survive the next, how many months was that? 17 months. And then to get back out on the road, to be back on the show floor. And that picture, actually, we're kind of breaking the rules because I don't know what the statute of limitations is in the city of Kansas, but we were all supposed to have masks on because we were indoors at that point. So we're violating a city ordinance there.
You rule breaker.
Yeah, this is not an omission of guilt, just so we're clear. But Bob, the guy in the Punisher shirt, is kind of my right-hand man. Anytime I'm at a show, he's with me, and we've moved more comic boxes in the last couple of years than I care to count. Jeremy, the guy in the Batman shirt, both of those guys were part of the Rock Bottom kind of LCS hangout club, part of the FCBD crew every year. So we've just kind of been friends and bonded over comics over the course of the last 10 years or so. Bob is one of my best friends now, and I kind of created a monster because I've been into pre-code horror and stuff for a little while, and he kind of did me at my own game there. But that's okay. It's a good time. And then the other person there is Mrs. CoMo, my wife. And, Planet is the only show she comes to each year because she loves people watching. She's really into various different nerdy things. She really loves Harry Potter. She collects some pops, and she really has a great time at the show as well. So it was just kind of us all enjoying the fact that we were back where we wanted to be, where we like being after all the craziness that preceded that show.
Cool, man. So this leads me to question 8. And, obviously you're going and setting up at these cons, and I wanted to talk a little bit about and kind of promote I know you have a website, right, where you sell comics.
Sometimes, yeah.
So kind of talk about the business side of it. and all the different places that you sell comics. I mean, is it primarily going to cons? Do you do eBay, Mercari, Instagram? Like, kind of talk about what you do.
I've dabbled in a lot of different things, but the primary outlet for selling books for me has always been in person at shows. Previously, I did like a little bit of consigning at the shop I worked at. But the first Comic-Con I ever went to was actually just a little over 10 years ago. And I set up for the shop. And I took a year off, and then I went back and set up with them. And the more I did that, we started splitting the booth. And that's how I kind of got into setting up a Planet, the big show. And then I'd start filling in with little shows. So that's always kind of been my main source of funding or sales. I have a regular 9 to 5. I think that's one thing that is a misconception about me. It's like, I don't own my own shop. All right. This is all just inventory. So since I have a 9 to 5, all this stuff, I don't have to sell this stuff. So I can be a very patient seller. At the peak before COVID, we were doing 12 to 13 shows a year. So I like to try and do, it averages out to about one a month. But honestly, I usually try and take October through December off, just because I have other things I like to do during that time frame. And between football and hunting and all that, it gets pretty crowded. So when I got the YouTube channel, part of the monetization process, you have to sign up for AdSense. So I'm like, if I have to sign up for AdSense, I might as well have a website. Unfortunately, I've never been smart enough to figure out how to turn AdSense on the Squarespace website. So that's not happening anymore. But it was just kind of a place I could throw a couple weird books up to put them out there. And ultimately, I've been happy with how the website's performed. I don't promote it a lot. I don't push it a lot. And right now, I pulled everything off of it. But that's probably going to change. I've managed to sell enough over the course of the 2 years I've had it that it pays for the annual fee each year. So it's like it's self-sustaining at this point, which I'm fine with. But as far as IG, any of the other apps, I don't really mess with that stuff for the most part. I've seen way too many people that set up at shows, alongside me over the course of the years that they will sell in between shows. So then when they get to the show that they've had to come out, X hundreds of dollars just to be there, plus hotel, plus travel and all that, they set up, they don't have anything to sell because they sold all, it's easy to sell the easy stuff, right?
Right.
You need, kind of my philosophy is you've got to have scroll stoppers is essentially how I refer to them, just the same as like you're scrolling through a feed. You need to have a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1 on your wall to stop people. You need to have an ASM 50 on your wall to stop people. If you want to get kind of niche and kind of just shock factor, you need to have a Hansi #1 on your wall to stop people. There are just certain books like that you need to have available to get people to stop at your booth. And when you sell all that stuff in between shows, you don't have that. So that's getting people to stop is the hardest thing, because once they stop, then you can engage them.
Right.
Then you can ask them what they're looking for. You can point them in the right direction. They may start just automatically digging through a box. At that point, the ball's in your court. But if you can't get those people to stop because you've already sold everything, you just made it a lot harder on yourself. That said, like I said, I did this show in Tulsa last weekend, and the old F-150 with the loaded down covered trailer wasn't very good on the miles per gallon. And we're sitting, I realized some of the people on the coast would kill for this, but for around here, we're sitting at like 4.25 in Columbia right now, which is really, really steep for us. I've never seen gas above $4 a gallon here, even back in the aughts when it got so out of hand. So it's it's kind of got me rethinking. I actually wound up backing out of a show that was supposed to be that's going to be in Springfield, Illinois in a week or so, just because the overhead has increased so much. It's not just gas is up a lot. Hotels are double what they were. So
Yep.
it started to kind of squeeze that margin. And I've got other platforms I can sell on now too. I'm on Whatnot. I do like a lot of run filler or just kind of randomness sales over there. Still trying to figure out a real good flow. Want to do some themed auctions, and I'm probably going to throw a couple of better things that I have multiples of up on the website. Especially I'm going to C2E2 this year, so I may want to get a little extra jingle in my pocket before I head up there and see what I can find.
Absolutely. So do you think Whatnot is going to be the app of the future? I know it was really hot to start, and I don't know if it's cooled off or not. I don't pay a ton of attention to it. I do watch the Whatnot sales, but do you think that will still continue as it builds and grows, that will be the app?
I think the advantage Whatnot has is the impulsiveness of it, right?
Sure.
Just like people who watch Twitch or just watch streaming in general as their base level of content, anytime you add FOMO to that and add a monetization element, where like people can just impulsively buy stuff. It's like, oh, that looks like a good deal. And next thing you know, you're paying $6 for a $1 comic or something like that. And I've seen some influencers that can run like $1, $2, or $3 comics for 20 or $25. And it's always interesting to watch the chat on books like that, because it's always people like, what the hell? You can buy this on eBay for 99 cents right now. So I think people kind of get caught up in the excitement of it. But they've also recently announced some changes to their shipping policy, because it used to be, you had to pay the base shipping price and then everything else you bought beyond that was $1. Now they've upped that to where I think each additional comic could potentially be $2.50.
Wow.
Or something like that. So that adds up really quickly, especially like one of the I had one customer in a couple of the auctions I did. He bought, a quarter or a third of the lot. So whereas his shipping would have been somewhere around $13 or $15 during those sales, now it would be $30 or $35 at the end of it. So I think it'll be interesting to see where that lands. I think that almost could be an effort to drive it more towards less budget friendly items, right? Like you're not going to run so much bulk as you're going to need to have more higher ticket items up there, so that if you're buying,
matters much.
Yeah, if you're buying a $50 or $100 book, or even a $25 book, $2.50 for shipping ain't that big a deal. But if you're buying a $3 book, but it's going to cost you another $2.50 to add it onto your shipping order, you're going to notice that, right?
Right. No, absolutely. All right. So last two questions. These are just kind of softball questions, just to learn a little more about you.
Okay.
Question 9 is, any hobbies outside of comics? Now, you mentioned you like to take some time off. You mentioned barbecue. I'm going to have to hook you up with my boy Rob Fat Stacks. He's out in California.
Nice.
Loves the barbecue. And you mentioned hunting. Like, what other hobbies do you have, outside of comic books that you like to spend time on?
Okay. Well, I've gotten back into like some vintage action figure stuff, just things I had when I was a kid, specifically like Masters of the Universe.
Me too.
It's so great. Really enjoy that. And I like Universal Monsters. So like there's some Remco lines. I picked up some vintage Star Wars, things like that. So Ghostbusters, Turtles, I could go on forever about that as well. I like barbecue. During the lockdown, my wife and I actually wound up winning a couple prizes at our company Christmas party.
Nice.
So we pooled those and we bought a Traeger, which I realized, pellet grills can be controversial somewhat. But it really is the Keurig of barbecue, which has really helped me get motivated to try and learn how to cook different things. So I really enjoy that. And then just anytime we're on the road, I don't care where we're going, we're going to find the best barbecue place within drive time, and we're going to be there. So it doesn't matter, if that's Carolina, if that's Oklahoma, if it's Kansas, wherever, we're going to find your good barbecue, and that's where we're going to be. I'm a waterfowl hunter. Really, I've always liked birds. I don't know why, but that's my thing. We've got labs, so that kind of just goes hand in hand with that. Also, deer and turkey, just the basics, nothing too crazy. Just honestly enjoy getting the hell out of the office and sitting in the woods every once in a while just to clear my head.
It's very peaceful. It really is.
It's great. Just wind and birds, and it's pretty sweet.
So when you go to a barbecue joint,
what
are you getting? Like, what are you looking for?
Well, I mean, now that's tough because the different styles obviously have their different things. If I'm in a Texas style, I'm trying your beans, I'm trying your brisket, because they don't separate. Kansas City, I'm 100% getting your burnt ends. I'm going to judge you based off your burnt ends. If I'm in Carolina, I'm going to judge you by your mustard sauce. For South Carolina specifically, I guess that is. And then North Carolina on your chopped pork, which I don't give many points for pulled pork because that's like the mac and cheese of barbecue. Like, that's base level, but I have had some that are good enough that I'll stand up and take note. But kind of my universal test across all kinds of barbecue places is pickles.
Really?
If you have good pickles, that will let me know how much you actually care about the barbecue. But if your pickles pair well with your cue, then you're paying attention to the details.
Interesting. I've never heard that. Like, I will occasionally go barbecue. I like barbecue. It's probably not something I seek out necessarily. I'm more of a steak connoisseur. Like, I love steak.
Oh yeah.
I'm more of that kind of connoisseur. But yeah, but I love a good barbecue though, and the pickles. That's an interesting take. I love that.
Yeah, you can tell the places that make their own pickles, that doctor it or put in the time to go out and get a good grade pickle versus just we're at Costco and we're going to grab the gallon jar of whatever they have.
Gotcha. All right, last question.
Yes, sir.
Do you have an ultimate grail that you don't have? Like, is there a book that you want that you don't have?
Yeah. It started out, it was AF-15, and I got one of those about a decade ago, thank God. But I drug my feet, and I never bought a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1 first print. I passed up a fairly local guy, I mean, same state anyway, as you. Dale Roberts had a CGC 8.0 that I passed over in, I think it was August of 2019. He had 6K on it. That same book's about 25 right now, 25 to 30. Yeah. Because it's one of those books that during the pandemic just exploded like everything else. But whereas a lot of things have drifted down a bit, it stayed relatively flat. They're kind of wishy-washy a little bit. But when the rubber meets the road with that book, you're talking a multi-generational fan base, limited supply. There were only I think 3,275 that were ever printed, and those last 275 were because of an oops. It's just the tip of the mountain for me right now. And I mean, I could check down. There's a lot of Golden Age books that I'd like to have. I collect Batman villain first appearances. Batman 1 obviously is never going to happen, but I still have a shot at like Detective 66, which is the first Two-Face, or Detective 140, the first Riddler. I've got several of the Golden Age ones already, but it's just that kind of stuff. But Turtles 1 is probably the main one right now.
Cool. Well, Drew, that's 10 questions, baby. I appreciate you coming on. I've had a ball. Very, very good interview. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. I've had a good time.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on and taking the time. So, guys, go over, check Drew out over on CoMo Comic Books. I'll link all his stuff down in the description below. We've been gone for a little bit. I ran for a political office, so I had to take a little break. This is my first 10 questions back. I appreciate you guys coming and joining us today. This has been 10 Questions.